Hello, I've got a couple of books to share with you today. Here they are. I have recently finished reading all three of these and thought I would come on and talk to you about what they are about. So, in no particular order, I think I'll go ahead and start with Bambi because that was on top, so why not? Okay, so Bambi, what do I have to say about this? Well, it was published in 1923 and is a work of fantasy, I guess is what it would be considered. And more than just being a children's book, I would say this is a book for all ages. I do think it's something that could be read to children, and I think would be pretty appropriate for that. But I also think there's enough in this book that young adults and adults alike would really enjoy this read as well. Bambi is by and large a book that I would say is a story of the forest that's told from the point of view of a newborn fawn all the way through his life as an adult roebuck. And in this book, you are following his daily life and the fun and the frolic and fear that he encounters as a deer just living in the woods, where he is making friends, learning the ways of the deer, and also learning to fear him. And that is a major feature that occurs throughout the book. There are quite a few topics that this book covers, including life and death, self-discovery, isolation, friendship, and the danger of men to nature and the animals of the forest, most especially in a look at hunting and more specifically how hunting was done at this time. This was a topic that was near and dear to Felix Salten's heart, and he spent a lot of time in the book really getting into how hunting was working and how sort of brutal it was by nature at that time, or how unnaturally brutal it was, I guess would be a better way of putting it. There were multiple pros for me in reading this book. I thought the writing style itself was probably one of the strongest features. There was a lot of nature writing, but not overwhelming descriptions of things, just really good place setting and constant mention of nature and the forest and the environment. And I really felt like the author put you in the forest without having to have pages and pages of like description of the woods. He did it in a much more constant and subtle manner, which I personally really enjoyed. I also liked how well he was able to characterize Bambi and just the sort of childish voice he was able to give him and the point of view he was able to provide of just being a child and not really understanding what's going on in the world around you, or I guess really being a fawn and not understanding what was going on in the world around you. I think one of my favorite examples of like just the interesting perspectives you get in this book was the point in time where there are the leaves in here. And if you've read the book, you know what I'm talking about. I absolutely loved that moment in the book. I thought it was so well written and just really poignant. And there were a lot of moments like that in the book. It is like the movie in terms of if you've seen the Disney movie, you know at least one of the sad points in the book. But I will say the book is actually a little bit sadder than the movie because you really follow Bambi throughout his life, as well as the lives of all the characters he meets. And if you know anything about animal life in the wild, especially small animals in the wild and in the forest, life is dangerous. And so, with that, I would say that my one sort of drawback that I found in the book is that while it is a book that I think children could love and enjoy, it can get pretty heavy. And so I think it's a book where you need to know yourself and your audience well if you're going to be sharing this with someone else, because it would be really easy to find this like just heartbreaking. I personally didn't, but I definitely had moments where I was like, no, no. And I don't think I would have been able to handle this kid as a book. I was like much more sensitive to like everything that happened with cute little animals. And while on the one hand, I was like, oh, I should have read this in the spring or summer when the animals were outside like my window. In retrospect, I'm glad I didn't. I don't think I needed to have that close an association between what was happening in the book and the animals that I can physically see outside my door. So I think I'm kind of glad that I read this before they all started coming out. The only other negative I can think about with this book is that because Felix Sultan really did have a lot of negative things to say about the brutality of hunting, especially during the time when he was alive. I think he unintentionally also has a lot of really negative things to say about humanity in general. And that can come across as a bit harsh because the villain in the books really are the people. And so that's also something to consider just in terms of what kind of messaging you might want to be reading or sharing, particularly with children. All that said and done, I rated this book 4 stars. I did really like it. I'm really glad I read it. And it wasn't on my TBR. It was just kind of a random book I picked up, I think on a day that I had finished another book and I just wanted to keep reading. I would say I would recommend this to anyone who liked the movie and liked the character of Bambi and his interaction with the different forest animals. I think if you liked that, you will like this book and probably even more than the movie. And even if you didn't like the movie, but you liked the idea of, just the anthropomorphic animals and the forest life in there, I would still give the book a try. And this is a great book if you like works that are set in nature and give you that atmosphere. And I also think this is a great book for anybody who loves anthropomorphic animals as the main characters in books. This book reminds me a lot of Watership Down, even in terms of the levels of like danger of things. And I think if you liked Watership Down, you would really like this book, but it's a much gentler book in terms of the animals in some ways. I think this is another great all ages book like Peter Pan. So if you've read Peter Pan and you liked how that wasn't just a children's book, but gave like some good nostalgia vibes, this is another great one to read. And I would add to that E.T.A. Hoffman's version of The Nutcracker, as well as Alexander Dumas' version of The Nutcracker. So if you liked any version of The Nutcracker and just that kind of childhood story that you're familiar with, but maybe haven't read the classic novel, I would read any of those or Bambi. The next book I have to discuss is Convenience Store Woman. This is for a book club that I am in. I'm in a lot of book clubs right now, but I am enjoying all of them. And this is our read for the month of March. And I have never read this book before, but one of my bookish friends, she mentioned that this was very much like one of the books that we had recently buddy read. And I'll talk about that towards the end of this review. But this is a work by Sayaka Murata, and it's translated by Jenny Takamori. It was published in 2016 and was met with a lot of booksphere hype, I feel like. It's a work of contemporary and literary fiction, and I really enjoyed this book. In fact, I enjoyed it way more than I expected to. But let me first start by telling you what this book is about. This book is about Keiko, who is a enthusiastic sales clerk at your typical convenience store, but there is nothing typical about Keiko herself. She is described as by her coworkers and other people as being kind of weird. Her family just wishes she would be normal, and she is finding herself constantly torn between being herself and loving and being content with her job, or just simply fitting in with societal norms. This book is a really well done look at neurodivergence, masking specifically in women, social conformity, and self acceptance. And to back up real quickly, if you're not familiar with the term masking, it is the term that is used to refer to how someone may cover up their natural tendencies or personality traits or habits to better try and fit in with the people around them and the social setting. And I have to say that was for me probably one of the things that this book did the best. I really feel like this is a sort of master class in what it looks like to mask as a woman who may have some sort of neurodivergence, or at least has personality traits that they're aware does not fit into what is considered normal. And I thought that the author did this brilliantly with the main protagonist, Keiko. I also thought that one of the other things that was done really well in this book was just the characterization of all of the people in the book. I thought I thought the author was able to do a really good job in sharing those characters motivations, as well as like just really getting you, the reader, to look at and consider how much we communicate through our expressions and our actions and that kind of thing. And all of those are things that you need in a book to characterize someone that is not standing in front of you. And I think this author did it brilliantly. And she really helped you, the reader, slow down and think about all the subtle signals we send to other people about whether or not we think what they're doing is okay or not. And that becomes very important to our protagonist, since that's what she bases a lot of her own behavior off of, is what she interprets as being other people's approval or disapproval of what she is doing. If there was any con in this book for me, it had to do with the dialogue, which I felt like was stilted at times, and sometimes that worked for the setting and the conversation, and sometimes it just felt like the dialogue was weak, and I could never really settle myself on where it was intentional and where it was just accidental. And so that's actually the only reason this book got 4.5 stars for me. I felt like the writing could have been just a little more clear in terms of why it felt stilted. Instead, sometimes it just felt like that was an unintentional choice by the author. And so it kept it from being a 5 star. But if I'm honest, this book is somewhere between 4.5 and 5 stars for me. And honestly, I borrowed it from the library and I definitely see myself buying this book because I could see myself rereading it. So I should probably just give it the 5 stars. I think this is a great book for anybody who likes a really good character story and likes a sort of quirky protagonist, but one that's also very relatable in their quirks. I think it was a very inspirational story and has a really good message that I think pretty much anyone could relate to, whether you have a neurodivergence or not. I think it goes along with that idea that we're all just kind of trying to fit in. And I really liked where this book ended. And so I think this is a great read for anybody who's looking for a shorter book that's not like soul crushingly depressing, which I feel like is sometimes the trend in more contemporary literature. If you're looking for other books that are like this, I think Sky Daddy is one, surprisingly enough, even though it seems like it wouldn't be one. That was the book that my friend said, "Hey, we are buddy reading this book, Sky Daddy." And she was like, "This reminds me a lot of Convenience Store Woman." And I have to say, from page one, I had the same exact thought. So if you like the main character in Convenience Store Woman, I would actually say give Sky Daddy a try. I think the books land in two different places in terms of what they're discussing and the treatment and that kind of thing, but that can also just be a really interesting comparison. I will say that I liked Convenience Store Woman a lot more than Sky Daddy, but I was surprised how good of a book I thought Sky Daddy was. Other books that kind of remind me of this book would be There's No Such Thing as an Easy Job. I think that is another great book that sort of just looks at women in the workplace and that pressure from society to have the perfect job or to have an easy job. And there's quite a bit more magical realism in that book, and it is a full-length novel. So if that's something you wanted, I think that would be a good book to give a try. And another one would be Diary of a Void. I recently read that. I think that's another really interesting book by following another really fascinating female character and looking at her experience of life and just the pressures of different things in the workplace. I think there are a lot of really good books out there that are looking at women in the workplace in a contemporary setting and just the pressures that there are on women to work and the type of work they should be doing. And all that said, I think if I was to read another book like this or similar to it, I think the first place I would actually go is to read more by this author. She has written quite a few books. I feel like she's a pretty hyped Japanese writer at this point, and I was afraid that this book and some of her other books were maybe being overhyped. But like I said at the beginning, this book held up to all the hype. I was actually really pleasantly surprised by it, and I definitely want to read more by this author. Next, I read Inanna. This is by Emily H. Wilson. This is not the same Emily Wilson that wrote the new translation of the Odyssey and Iliad. This is a totally different author altogether. Thus, I believe the H in the middle of her name to try and distinguish the two. It is tricky because this Emily Wilson is also writing about mythology, but unlike the Emily Wilson that is more well known, who is writing about Greek mythology, this book and this trilogy, which is the Sumerian trilogy, is actually about mythology in ancient Mesopotamia and specifically in the area of Sumer. This was published in 2023 and is a work of fantasy as well as sort of a mythological retelling, which it's not a genre that I read a lot of, and I especially don't read a lot of fantasy nowadays, but I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was really well done for fantasy. I feel like it stayed away from a lot of the typical tropes you find in fantasy. I would say it's like a fantasy adventure, but it was just such a different storyline, such a different like place and time, and the characters all had their own specific thing they were doing. I think because it's ancient Mesopotamia mythology, it's mythology that I was less familiar with, so made the story feel a lot newer than some of the fantasy that I think is out there today, especially when it's myth retellings. This story itself is told in three parts for the most part, and it's three different points of view. One is Inanna, who is a goddess who has recently been born at a time where the gods have ceased to reproduce and new gods have not come along in a long time. Inanna is the goddess of war and love and does in actual mythology eventually kind of become conflated with Aphrodite as the mythologies start to subsume one another in actual history. The one of the other points of view this book is told from is Gilgamesh, because this is a retelling of the Epic of Gilgamesh, and he is a major player in this. Gilgamesh himself, historically, as far as I know, if he was a real person, was at one time a king of Sumer. In this book, you are meeting him sort of at the start of his life. I mean, that makes it sound like he's really young. He's early on in his career, I should say. So he is in his late teens. He's maybe 17, 18 when he comes on the scene, but he's already been proven in battle and is kind of a legendary warrior where he is. The third point of view that we meet in this book is of Ninshbar, and she is sort of an unknown woman from the south of Africa who is from a tribe that is known to run after their hunt and after their game. And she is from a culture where women aren't typically warriors, but if they prove themselves, they can be. And she has proven herself time and time again. She is definitely a warrior who, for a variety of reasons, ends up coming more north. And the story kind of follows these three points of view as the characters come closer and closer together and join forces for unsure causes at this point, I should say, because this is book one in the trilogy. And it is really, really good. I did realize as I read through the book that this trilogy, I believe, is going to focus on each of the three characters that I just mentioned. Book one is called Inanna. Book two is Gilgamesh, and book three is Ninshabar. So I think we kind of focus on their lives and trajectories through each of the three books, even though all three of them are mentioned pretty equally throughout the books. The topics that are discussed in this book are definitely ancient mythology, especially in the area of Sumer. You get a lot of the story of the Epic of Gilgamesh in here. You get a lot about Sumerian culture as well as history, and you also get an underlying theme of like friendships and enemies and that kind of thing, and who can you trust in your life. But by and large, it really is a mythological and epic retelling done in a sort of fantasy mode. Quite a bit of what's in this book is from the Epic of Gilgamesh, though where needed, Emily H. Wilson does take license to expand upon the story. One of the things that I really appreciated is that in the back of this book, she goes into more detail about what she did take from the culture of Sumer or from the Epic of Gilgamesh versus what she just added in to make it a cohesive story. And I think she did a really well done. And I think she did a really good job with all of the above. Some of the strongest points of this book for me was that it was a pretty fast-paced plot. It was moving from the very start and really kept my attention the entire time. Again, I think because it's a very unique story and setting, one that I feel like rarely comes up in books, and particularly in the fantasy world, and there was really never a dull moment in here. If there were any cons, I would say that there is a lot of focus on ancient god behavior in Sumer, which includes like a lot of like erotic god encounters in the temples. So be aware of that, that she holds nothing back. Like if it was part of the mythology and the accepted culture in Sumer at that time, the author does not hesitate to include that in the book, whether it's something that lines up with our modern day values or sensibilities. Now, this isn't necessarily approved of or not within the book. It's just clear that she's sharing like what the cultural beliefs were at the time. However, if you don't like to read things like that, you might want to check the content warnings because there are definitely some things in here that are, let's just say, no longer socially acceptable. All that said and done, I gave this book 4.5 stars, so it was another good win for me. I really liked it, and I definitely have no problem continuing on with the series. I'm feeling even more excited about getting to book 2. I'm really looking forward to rereading the Epic of Gilgamesh, and I think this is a really good companion book to go with. Or if you don't want to read the Epic of Gilgamesh because you just don't want to read that ancient classic, this book might change your mind. If you like character-based books that feel like they're plot-based books, I think this would be a good book for that. If you like fantasy, I think this is a fantasy series that's worth starting. I haven't read book 2 or 3, so I can't say worth finishing, but at least book 1 is enjoyable, and I do feel like it's going to leave you wanting to read book 3. I mean, book 2. You should probably do them in order. If you enjoy mythological retellings, but you're kind of tired of Greek and Roman mythology, give this a try. It feels very different. And I also feel like she goes into a bit more historical detail than some of your typical ones do. It's going to read like adventure historical fiction, I feel like, a bit more than fantasy. I feel like the fantasy part that comes in is that there is magic or something. And again, if you want to read more books that are like this or want to know what books I feel like are like this book, I would suggest Circe or Song of Achilles, of course. I would definitely recommend reading the Epic of Gilgamesh so that you have some more background information on this whole storyline. Though do be warned, if you read book 1 and then you go and read the Epic of Gilgamesh is going to spoil everything that happens in this book because she does share a lot of the same things, but that may or may not bother you. And then finally, the other classic that I could recommend based off of this book would be The Odyssey. If you liked The Odyssey, you will probably like this story. If you like this story, you may find you want to give The Odyssey a try. Like if you like the retellings, why not try the original? So that is it. Those are the 3 books that I read in the last, I don't even know how long, because the reading has actually been a struggle of late. I don't know why, but I've just been feeling very picky about the books I've been picking up. In fact, I know why. It's because I've been not sleeping well, and so I've been really tired. And so I only have so much energy to put into particular books. It's not that I don't have the energy to read, it's just I don't have the energy to read every type of book. But these 3 books have worked really well, no matter how tired I was. So I think because they all kept me very engaged, the shorter ones, while they may have been heavier and more intense in topic, weren't too long for my tired brain to work on. And the longer book had a lot of action and kept going. So maybe these are also 3 recommendations of books to read when you're tired. So take that as you will. That's it for me today. Let me know what you're reading or working on, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye.